The interstellar diplomatic concordat had been operating for approximately 7,000 standard cycles, which was impressive considering that getting 3 species to agree on anything usually required at least 4 committees, 6 subcommittees, and 1 inevitable fistfight in a parking structure. Getting 47 species to coexist in relative harmony? That was the kind of miracle that made cynics weep and optimists insufferable. The crown jewel of this unlikely achievement was Station Zenith 7, a massive orbital platform that floated in neutral space like a very expensive, very fragile promise that everyone would play nice. It was here that treaties were signed, disputes were mediated, and various species pretended they didn't find each other's eating habits absolutely revolting. The station's architecture reflected this diplomatic idealism. Soaring atriums filled with bioluminescent gardens, gravity-neutral conference halls, and enough redundant life support systems to accommodate species ranging from methane breathers to those things from Sector 9 that nobody wanted to discuss at dinner parties. Among the galaxy's more impressive species were the Keshari, and they knew it. 7 feet of scaled muscle, retractable claws that could punch through reinforced steel, and a jaw structure that suggested their ancestors had eaten things that very much did not want to be eaten. They looked like what would happen if you took every apex predator from Earth's evolutionary history, threw them in a blender set to nightmare fuel, and gave the result a philosophy degree. Their homeworld was a death trap of megafauna and hostile ecosystems that made survival feel like a personal insult from the universe. But here was the thing about the Keshari that made them genuinely remarkable, and not just another species of scary lizard people that the galaxy seemed to produce with disappointing regularity. They had evolved past all that violence nonsense. Somewhere around 3,000 years ago, they had collectively looked at their blood-soaked history and said, "You know what? This is exhausting. Let's try something else." They had built a civilization based on logic, emotional control, and the firm belief that intelligence meant transcending one's baser instincts. They were vegetarians now, which amused some species and horrified others. They practiced meditation, wrote poetry that made grown Valorians weep, and hadn't had a murder on their homeworld in 6 centuries. They were very proud of this. Perhaps a bit too proud, if you asked certain species who found their air of superiority somewhat grating. Vex Karath embodied everything the Keshari had become. At 43 standard years, he was young for a senior diplomatic attaché. But his record spoke for itself. He had negotiated the Vryn trade disputes, mediated the Corellian succession crisis, and once talked down a Zetharian war fleet through sheer force of logic and what witnesses described as aggressive reasonableness. He wore the traditional diplomatic robes of his people, deep crimson marked with silver glyphs denoting his rank and achievements. His scales were the color of polished obsidian, his eyes a startling amber that seemed to catalog everything they observed. He was, in his own estimation and that of most others, excellent at his job. Controlled, rational, the very picture of evolved consciousness. He was also, though he would never admit it, deeply unsettled by humanity. The humans had joined the Concordat only 15 cycles ago, which in galactic terms was basically yesterday. They had stumbled into the greater universe with their characteristic mixture of enthusiasm and chaos, like a puppy that had accidentally wandered into a wolf pack and somehow convinced everyone to play fetch. The galaxy's initial assessment had been fragile, short-lived, emotionally volatile, probably harmless in small doses. That assessment was currently under review. The problem with humans, Vex Karath had concluded, was that they made no sense. They were simultaneously the most fragile species in the Concordat and the most disturbingly difficult to kill. They lived in a constant state of barely controlled anxiety about everything. Their health, their relationships, their planetary climate, whether they had remembered to turn off their kitchen appliances. Yet somehow this neurotic mess of a species had conquered their entire solar system and were eyeing the next one with troubling enthusiasm. They formed emotional attachments to anything and everything, including mechanical devices and small animals that could barely be classified as sentient. They cried at fictional stories. They laughed at their own pain. They were exhausting to be around. Riley Chen was particularly exhausting. She was the human contingent's security liaison, which meant she spent her days mediating disputes, coordinating protection details, and generally making sure that the various species on Station Zenith 7 didn't accidentally start an interstellar incident because someone's pheromones smelled like insults in someone else's native language. She was small by galactic standards, maybe 5.5 feet of compact muscle and stubborn attitude. Her hair was long and dark, usually pulled back in a practical braid that fell past her shoulders. Her eyes were brown and sharp and missed absolutely nothing, which Vex Karoth found profoundly irritating because he prided himself on being the one who noticed everything. They had been working in adjacent roles for 3 cycles now, and their relationship could best be described as professionally hostile. She thought he was an arrogant, condescending lizard who needed to remove the stick from his posterior. He thought she was an emotional, impulsive mammal who let feelings cloud her judgment. They were both correct, which made their interactions even more insufferable. The Talaxian delegation is demanding separate quarters, Riley said without preamble, appearing in his office doorway like a harbinger of bureaucratic headaches. She didn't wait for an invitation to enter, just walked in and dropped a datapad on his desk. Apparently, they find the Vryn's evening songs spiritually disruptive. Vex Karoth didn't look up from his own work. The quarters were assigned based on environmental compatibility and security protocols. The Talaxians can meditate through the inconvenience. See, I tried that approach. You know what happened? The Talaxian ambassador threatened to realign my chakras through aggressive means, which I'm pretty sure was a threat of violence disguised as spiritual wellness. Did you escalate to Commander Thex? I'm escalating to you because Thex is dealing with the Corellian trade minister who got drunk on fermented Zelok and is currently trying to challenge the Zetharian honor guard to single combat. It's been a day, Vex. He finally looked up. She looked tired, he noticed. Humans always look tired, their short lifespans seemingly burning at both ends with disturbing intensity. The galaxy does not pause because you have had a day, Officer Chen. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Wow. Thank you for that profound observation. Here I was thinking the universe revolved around my convenience. What would I do without your wisdom? Function poorly, I imagine. Definitely. I'd probably just collapse into an emotional heap without your steady reptilian guidance. Maybe cry a little. Make poor decisions. You make poor decisions regardless. And yet somehow, I keep solving problems you can't. She tapped the datapad. The Talaxians. You want to handle it with logic and protocols? Or should I just do my primitive human thing and actually fix it? Vex Karoth's claws clicked against his desk, an unconscious gesture of irritation that he immediately stilled. She noticed, of course. Her eyes tracked the movement with the awareness of someone who had learned to read body language across 47 species. Troublesome creature. I will speak with the Talaxian delegation, he said with exaggerated patience. I am certain we can reach a logical accommodation that satisfies all parties. Sure. Good luck with that. I'll be in the security hub when it inevitably falls apart. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Oh, and Vex? The reception tonight? The one celebrating the Vrin-Corellian trade agreement? Maybe try smiling. I know it's not in your species' current programming, but the predator face isn't great for diplomacy." She left before he could respond, which was fortunate because his response would have been professionally inappropriate. The reception that evening was held in the Grand Atrium, a space designed to impress and overwhelm in equal measure. The ceiling was a transparent dome that offered an unobstructed view of the local nebula. Swirls of cosmic dust and newborn stars painted across the void in shades of purple and gold. Tables were arranged to accommodate different species' needs: standing height for the Vrin, cushioned alcoves for the Rolathi, specialized pressure chambers for the aquatic meridians. The air was carefully filtered and balanced to avoid triggering anyone's allergies or respiratory distress, though there was always someone who complained anyway. Vex Karath moved through the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging pleasantries in 17 different languages, making mental notes of useful information gleaned from casual conversations. This was diplomacy at its finest. The careful dance of information gathering disguised as social nicety. He was good at this. He had trained for this. Every gesture calculated, every word measured. He spotted Riley across the room, talking with a group of junior diplomats from various species. She was laughing at something one of them said, her whole face lighting up with genuine amusement. Humans did that. Expressed emotion with their entire bodies in a way that seemed almost obscene to more controlled species. Inefficient, revealing, vulnerable. And yet, he noticed that the young diplomats seemed relaxed around her in a way they never were around him. Interesting. Annoying, but interesting. The trouble started, as trouble often does, with alcohol. The Talaxians had their own intoxicants, substances that affected their neural chemistry in ways that made them feel connected to what they called the universal consciousness. In practice, this meant they got philosophical and handsy, a combination that rarely ended well. Ambassador Kellux had apparently been connecting with the universal consciousness for several hours, and the universe was giving him terrible advice. Vex Karath noticed the commotion before he heard it. Riley had moved toward a cluster of Talaxians with that particular alertness that security personnel developed, the kind that said something was wrong but hadn't yet become a disaster. He began moving in that direction as well, old instincts recognizing the shift in social dynamics that preceded conflict. "I am simply saying," Kalux was announcing loudly, his translation collar rendering his speech in standard concordat lingua, "that human claims of emotional sophistication are vastly overstated. You are children playing at consciousness." Riley's voice was calm, professional. "Ambassador, perhaps we should continue this conversation when you've had a chance to rest. Do not condescend to me, human." Kalux swayed slightly, his three-eyed gaze unfocused. "Your species mistakes chaos for depth. You feel everything and understand nothing." "That's definitely an opinion," Riley said, still in that carefully neutral tone. "And you're entitled to it. But maybe we should—" Kalux reached out and grabbed her braid, yanking it hard enough to jerk her head back. "See? So fragile. So soft. You break at the slightest." What happened next occurred faster than Vex Karath's conscious mind could process. Riley's hand snapped up, caught Kalux's wrist in a grip that made the Talaxian's eyes widen in pain. She twisted, stepped inside his reach, and did something with her hip and shoulder that sent the ambassador crashing to the floor despite his being twice her mass. The entire sequence took perhaps 2 seconds. She didn't let go of his wrist, keeping it locked at an angle that suggested any movement would result in something breaking. Her voice, when she spoke, was absolutely level. "Ambassador Kalux, you are intoxicated. You have assaulted a Concordat security officer. I am going to release you now. You are going to apologize. Then you are going to return to your quarters. If you resist, I will dislocate your shoulder. Do we have an understanding?" The room had gone silent. Everyone was staring. Kalux, to his credit, or perhaps due to survival instinct temporarily overriding intoxication, nodded frantically. Riley released him and stepped back, helping him to his feet with the same professional courtesy she would offer anyone. "My apologies for the rough handling, Ambassador. I hope you feel better in the morning." Vexkaroth had crossed the remaining distance without thinking. His hand landed on Riley's shoulder, meant to be steadying, professional. "Officer Chen, perhaps you should—" His claws, longer and sharper than he usually kept them because he had been annoyed earlier and hadn't bothered to file them down, caught in her hair. Not painfully, but enough that when she reflexively pulled back, there was a tug, a pull. The sensation of her hair caught against his claws. Something in Vexkaroth's brain just snapped. It wasn't pain exactly. It wasn't even the action itself. It was the smell. Human blood, just the faintest trace where his claw had scratched her scalp. It was the sound of her sharp intake of breath. It was the sudden spike of her heart rate that his predator's hearing detected without conscious effort. It was the realization that he had caused pain. And something very, very old woke up inside him and roared. The rational part of Vexkaroth's mind, the part that had mediated treaties and practiced meditation and written poetry, became very distant. It was still there, screaming in horror. But it was screaming from behind a wall of instinct that had been buried for 3,000 years of evolution and cultural development. The Keshari had been apex predators. They had hunted in packs, taken down prey 3 times their size, defended territory with vicious efficiency. They had been creatures of rage and hunger and violence. They had evolved past that. They had transcended. Except, it turned out, they hadn't. They had just built a very good cage and convinced themselves the monster inside was dead. The cage door was now open. Vexkaroth's vision went red at the edges. His lips pulled back from his teeth. No, his fangs, because that's what they were, weren't they? His claws extended to their full length. 3 inches of molecular sharp keratin designed to rend and tear. The civilized diplomat was gone. Something much older and considerably more dangerous was standing in the grand atrium, and it was very, very angry that someone had interfered with his... No. Wait, that wasn't right. This was Officer Chen. This was a colleague. This was... She smelled like prey. Small, soft, vulnerable. Injured. His claws had injured her. He had broken protocol, lost control, hurt someone under his protection, and the shame and rage and ancient instinct all blended into a toxic cocktail that made his higher reasoning shut down completely. He wasn't aware of the security officers trying to restrain him. Wasn't aware of the screaming, the chaos, the diplomatic reception turning into a battlefield. He was only aware of the need to destroy, to lash out, to make the world bleed because he had failed. Lost control, become what his species had spent millennia trying to forget. 3 Concordat security officers learned very quickly that Keshari peaceful evolution was, perhaps, not as complete as advertised. The first one got thrown through a refreshment table. The second one made the mistake of using a shock baton, which just made Vexkaroth angrier. The third one was Vryn, actually knew how to fight, and still ended up with claw marks across his armor that would require professional repair. Vex Karath was vaguely aware of protocol alarms blaring, of heavy security doors beginning to seal, of voices shouting orders in multiple languages. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the rage and the shame and the ancient, instinctive need to... Vex. The voice was quiet, human, completely out of place in the chaos. Vex, look at me. Riley Chen had not run. Everyone else had cleared a wide perimeter around the berserk Kashari, who was demonstrating why his species had been the dominant predators on one of the galaxy's most dangerous worlds. But Riley Chen, who was 5.5 feet of fragile mammalian biology, stood 10 feet away, with her hands visible and empty. "I know you can hear me," she said, still in that calm voice. "I know you're in there somewhere, probably screaming, probably horrified. That thing you're feeling? That rage? I know it, Vex. I know it so well." His head snapped toward her, amber eyes blown wide and unfocused. A low growl rumbled from his chest, the kind of sound that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the prey response hardwired into most species' brains. She didn't flinch. "You want to know why humans are so good at dealing with your diplomatic crises?" Riley continued, taking one careful step closer. "It's not because we're peaceful. It's not because we evolved past violence. It's because we live with this every single day." Another step. The security personnel were gesturing frantically, trying to signal her to retreat. She ignored them. Every human walking around carries a monster inside them, Vex. Every single one. We're tribal, territorial, violent animals who spent our entire evolutionary history killing each other over resources and mates and imaginary lines on maps. You know what the difference is between your species and mine? She was 5 feet away now. Close enough that if he lunged, there would be nothing anyone could do. You buried your monster and told yourself it was dead. We know exactly where ours lives. We look it in the eye every day. We acknowledge it, accept it, and then we choose to be something else anyway. 3 feet. That rage you're feeling, that shame, that horror at what you're capable of? Welcome to being human. We feel that every time someone cuts us off in traffic and we fantasize about running them off the road. Every time someone hurts someone we love, and we imagine what we'd do to them if society didn't have rules. Every time we fuck up and that little voice in our head says we deserve to hurt for it. She was directly in front of him now. Close enough to touch, close enough to kill with a single swipe of his claws. The monster isn't the problem, Vex. The monster just is. It's what you do with it that matters. She held out her hand, palm up. An offering. A gesture of trust so profound and stupid and human that it somehow cut through the red haze of his vision. Come back. Your monster had its moment. Now choose to be something else. The silence in the grand atrium was absolute. Vex Karath stared at her hand, at her face, at the small cut on her scalp where his claw had scratched her, already clotting because human blood did that, because humans were designed to take damage and keep functioning. At her eyes, which were calm and knowing and completely unafraid. The rage was still there, the instinct, the ancient drive to violence. But he could see past it now, see the bars of the cage, see the choice. He had always had the choice. His claws retracted slowly, painfully, like drawing back a part of himself that desperately wanted to be free. His breathing steadied. The higher reasoning centers of his brain began reasserting control, bringing with them a crushing wave of horror at what he had done, what he had become, what he had proven about himself. He took her hand, her small, fragile, human hand that should have been crushed in his grip, but instead held steady. "There you are," she said softly. "Welcome back." Then, to the stunned security personnel, "Stand down. Situation contained." The aftermath was predictably messy. Medical teams for the injured security officers. Incident reports in triplicate. A very uncomfortable conversation with Commander Thex, who looked at Vex Karath like he was a live explosive that had proven it could detonate without warning. The Talaxian delegation filed a formal protest, which was ironic considering their ambassador had started the entire disaster. The Concordat Council would need to be briefed. There would be inquiries. Consequences. Vex Karath sat in an interrogation room. No, a debriefing room, because calling it what it was would be uncivilized. And tried to reconcile the last hour with everything he had believed about himself. The door opened. Riley Chen walked in, carrying 2 containers of what smelled like human coffee and something that might have been tea. She set one in front of him and took the seat across the table. "You look like hell," she said conversationally. "I injured 3 security officers. I destroyed diplomatic property. I created an interstellar incident. I became..." His voice cracked. "I became the very thing my species has spent 3,000 years trying to forget." "Yeah, you really did." She sipped her coffee. "So what?" He stared at her. "So what? Vexens, you're sitting here having an existential crisis because you discovered you're still biologically wired for violence despite your cultural evolution. You know what that is. That's growth. That's self-awareness. That's the first step to actually dealing with it. My people believe we transcended our violent nature, that we evolved past such base instincts. And that's a beautiful lie that fell apart the second you got triggered." She leaned forward. "You want to know what I saw tonight? I saw a person discover something true about themselves and then choose to come back from it. That's not failure, Vex. That's courage. I could have killed someone, but you didn't. You could have kept raging, kept destroying, kept proving every scary thing people think about Keshari. But you didn't. You chose to stop. Because you talked me down. I gave you an excuse to choose," she corrected. "You did the choosing. Don't rob yourself of that." Vex Karath was silent for a long moment, processing. "You said you understand. The rage, the monster." Riley's smile was sad. "Vex, I'm human. We're really good at violence, disturbingly good. We came up with hundreds of ways to kill each other before we even left our planet. You know what we're also really good at? Living with that knowledge and choosing to do better anyway." "How?" "Practice. Constant, exhausting, never-ending practice." She finished her coffee. "Every day, I make the choice not to hurt people. Every day, I acknowledge that I could, that some part of me even wants to sometimes. And then I choose something else. It's not about not having the monster. It's about what you do with it. This is..." He struggled for words. "This is not how Keshari philosophy approaches such matters." "Yeah, well, Keshari philosophy kind of failed you tonight, didn't it?" She said it gently, but the words still landed like a blow. "Look, your species did something amazing. You built a civilization on peace and logic and transcending your base nature. That's incredible. But you did it by pretending the base nature didn't exist anymore. You buried it so deep you forgot it was there. And humans. We've been pulling each other's hair literally and metaphorically since we climbed out of the evolutionary soup. We know our monsters intimately. We see them every day in our history books and our news feeds and our own angry thoughts. We're not better than you, Vex. We're just painfully aware of how much worse we could be. That sounds exhausting. It really is. She stood up. But you know what? We're still here. We're still trying. We joined your fancy concordat, and we're doing our best not to embarrass ourselves too badly. Some days we succeed. Some days we fail. But we keep choosing to try. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth? You choosing to stop tonight? That was the most evolved thing I've seen anyone do in this entire station. You came face to face with your monster, and you didn't look away. You accepted it and chose to be something else anyway. That's not failure. That's being alive. She left him alone with his thoughts and his lukewarm tea. The Concordat's investigation took 2 weeks. During that time, Vex Karath was suspended from active duty, confined to quarters, and subjected to various psychological evaluations that seemed designed to determine whether he was a danger to himself or others. The evaluations were inconclusive, which seemed appropriate given that he was inconclusive about himself. The incident had sparked a galaxy-wide discussion about the nature of evolved consciousness versus suppressed instinct. The Kashari were mortified, their carefully constructed image as peaceful philosophers shattered by one diplomat's berserker rage. Some species expressed concern about allowing unstable predators in positions of power. Others pointed out that at least the Kashari were now being honest about their nature, which was more than could be said for several other species who pretended their evolution had erased all traces of violence. Humans, predictably, had opinions. Lots of opinions. Human philosophers and psychologists flooded the Concordat networks with essays about acknowledging one's shadow self, the importance of integrating rather than suppressing instinct, and various references to old Earth thinkers that Vex Karath tried to read, and mostly found confusing. Riley visited him on the 5th day of his confinement. She brought food, actual Kashari cuisine, properly prepared vegetarian dishes that someone had clearly researched extensively. "I'm not supposed to be here," she said, setting out the containers. "Thex would have my ass if he knew. But I figured you could use some company that wasn't a psychological evaluator or a lawyer." "Why?" Vex Karath asked quietly. "I nearly destroyed everything. I proved that my species' vaunted evolution is a facade. You had a bad day," Riley interrupted. "You had a really bad day where you discovered something uncomfortable about yourself. Join the club. We have jackets." Despite everything, he almost smiled. "You are remarkably cavalier about this. Vex, you want to know what humans did the first week we had access to nuclear weapons? We almost blew ourselves up 3 times. By accident. We're not cavalier. We're just experienced with people discovering they're capable of more destruction than they thought." She pushed a container toward him. "Eat. You look terrible, and I didn't go through the trouble of finding authentic Kashari food just to watch you mope." The food was good. Embarrassingly good. He hadn't realized how much he missed home cooking until he tasted it. "The council is meeting tomorrow to decide my fate," he said between bites. "The Kashari government has already recalled me. My diplomatic career is over." "Maybe," Riley said. "Or maybe it's evolving. Pun absolutely intended." "How can you joke about this?" "Because the alternative is despair, and I don't have time for that." She leaned back in her chair. "Look, you have 2 choices here. You can let this break you, convince yourself you're a monster, and spend the rest of your life hiding from what you learned about yourself. Or you can do the hard thing, which is accept it, integrate it, become someone who knows they have the capacity for violence and chooses peace anyway. Not because you've transcended it, but because you're actively choosing it every day." That sounds exhausting. "Welcome to being human." She grinned, We've been doing this for thousands of years. It doesn't get easier, but you do get better at it. The council's decision was announced the next day. Vex Karoth was not dismissed from the Concordat, but he was reassigned. No more high-level diplomatic negotiations. Instead, he would be working in the new Interspecies Psychology Initiative, studying the intersection of evolution, culture, and instinct across species. His partner in this endeavor would be Officer Riley Chen, who was apparently being promoted to Cultural Integration Specialist. "They're punishing us by making us work together," Riley said cheerfully when they met in their new shared office. "I'm not sure if that's genius or cruel." "Perhaps both," Vex Karoth admitted. The office was smaller than his previous one, but it had a window overlooking the nebula. "You requested this, didn't you?" "I may have strongly suggested to Commander Thex that having a Kishari who understands their own capacity for violence working with a human who's made peace with hers could be valuable for the Concordat. I may have also pointed out that most species could benefit from some honest conversations about the monsters they're carrying around." "You are disturbingly manipulative. I prefer strategically persuasive." She dropped a stack of data pads on her desk. "So, partner, ready to help the galaxy face its collective shadow?" Vex Karoth looked at her. This small, strange, impossibly resilient human who had looked at his monster and refused to flinch. Who had pulled him back from the edge, not by denying what he was, but by helping him see that what he was could coexist with who he chose to be. "I believe," he said slowly, "that I am beginning to understand why humans are so unsettling to other species." "Yeah? Why's that?" "Because you are honest about the parts of yourselves that everyone else pretends don't exist. You look at the darkness and you acknowledge it, and you keep moving forward anyway. It is terrifying and admirable in equal measure." Riley's grin was sharp and knowing. "Vex, you just described yourself. Welcome to the human condition. It's uncomfortable here, but the company's pretty good." 3 months later, Station Zenith 7 hosted a symposium on evolutionary psychology and cultural identity. The attendance was unprecedented. Species from across the Concordat came to hear about the work being done by the initiative, to discuss the complex relationship between instinct and choice, nature and nurture, what they had been and what they chose to become. Vex Karoth stood before the assembly, his scales gleaming in the atrium light, and spoke about the night he had lost control. He spoke about shame and horror, and the crushing realization that 3,000 years of cultural evolution had not erased his species' capacity for violence. He spoke about the choice to come back, to acknowledge the monster and refuse to let it define him. The audience was silent, rapt. Riley watched from the side of the stage, pride evident on her expressive human face. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. Later, in their office, she raised a glass of something alcoholic and probably terrible for his biology. "To monsters," she said. Vex Karoth raised his own glass. Water, because he had learned his limits. To choosing to be something else, anyway. "That's the spirit. You're getting good at this whole acknowledging your darkness thing. I had an excellent teacher." "Damn right you did." She clinked her glass against his. "So, ready for tomorrow? We've got the Vryn ambassador coming in to discuss their repressed aggression issues, followed by a session with the Karelian trade minister about their control problems. A schedule full of other species monsters. How delightful. Hey, at least ours are already out of the cage. We're ahead of the curve." Vex Karoth looked out the window at the stars, at the vast expanse of space filled with species, all carrying their own histories, their own instincts, their own carefully hidden or openly acknowledged monsters. The galaxy was messy and complicated, and full of creatures trying to be better than their biology demanded. It was, he thought, rather beautiful. "Riley," he said thoughtfully, "do you ever regret pulling me back that night? I could have hurt you. I could have killed you." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "No," she said finally. "You know why? Because you proved something important that night. You proved that having the capacity for violence doesn't mean you're defined by it. You proved that choice matters, that consciousness matters, that who we choose to be matters more than what we're wired to do." Very philosophical for a human. "Hey, we contain multitudes. It's kind of our thing." She smiled. "Besides, someone had to pull your hair to show you that you weren't as evolved as you thought. Consider it a service to galactic understanding. That was Kalux who pulled your hair. Details." She waved dismissively. "The point is, hair pulling led to monster revealing, which led to honest growth. It's all connected. Your logic is uniquely human and frustrating. I'll take that as a compliment." She stood up, stretching. "Come on, let's get dinner. I heard the human commissary got a shipment of actual Earth food, and I need to introduce you to the joy of unnecessarily spicy cuisine." "Will it trigger another violent episode?" "That depends on how much hot sauce you use." Vex Karoth followed her out of the office, this strange human who had somehow become not just a colleague, but something approaching a friend, who had looked at his darkest self and helped him see that darkness didn't have to mean destruction. The station hummed with life around them, 47 species coexisting in imperfect harmony, all carrying monsters they either acknowledged or denied, all making the choice every day to be something other than their worst instincts. And Vex Karoth, for the first time in his life, felt truly evolved. Not because he had transcended his nature, but because he had faced it and chosen to be more than it anyway. The human way, as it turned out, was exhausting and honest and strangely hopeful. He was learning to appreciate it. The galaxy, with all its monsters and choices, and surprisingly spicy food, awaited.